Mortis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. With all this fear and flurry about the coronavirus, it's only appropriate we have some stories about hospitals. Somewhere I hope none of you have to go anytime soon. So for now, get comfortable, rub your antiseptic gel in your hands, and let the darkness take control. I worked as an emergency room porter/attendant before med school, and one night one of the security guards came bolting down the hallway telling everyone not to use the taps. Of course, a nurse was right in the middle of washing her hands, so she freaks out, flings her hand in the air thinking the taps are poisoned or something. I'm not sure what her reasoning was, but I digress. The security guard asks her if the water was really hot, but she said it was lukewarm at best. What had happened is he was taking a dump on the 3rd floor and was splashed in the arse with boiling hot water. His first assumption was a boiler malfunction, closely followed by a fire in the walls boiling the water in the pipes. The security team brought in the fire department just in case, and they did all kinds of system checks with the water shut off. No other hot water except for his one magical ghost-infested throne on the 3rd floor. The older staff always claimed that the ambulatory care unit was haunted by a ghost named Winnie, an old nurse that died while at work, and the toilet the guard was on at the time happened to be directly above the unit, albeit 2 floors up. I'll never forget how freaked out he looked, thinking he was splashed on the butt by a horny old nurse lady ghost. My mother trained as a nurse at the Old Westminster Teaching Hospital in London in the 1950s. On one of her first night shifts, she was doing rounds in a children's ward. Everything was fine, all the kids were asleep, but in one of the rooms she found the sink faucet running, which was a bit weird because it had been fine when she'd been there a few minutes before. She figured that one of the kids had gotten up and been thirsty or something, turned it off, and carried on with the rounds. When her shift was over, she went to check out with the matron, who asked if she had anything to report. She said nothing except that someone had left the faucet on in one of the rooms. The matron looked horrified and gasped out, "Oh no." She then explained that the ward was haunted by a ghost which washed its hands, leaving the faucet running whenever a child was going to pass. My mother laughed this off, pointed out that none of the kids in the ward were seriously ill, and went home. When she came in for her night shift the next evening, she discovered that a previously perfectly fine child in that room had suffered a sudden seizure and passed a few hours after she'd found the open faucet. I work for a level 1 trauma center, receiving for 11 counties, implying a fair amount of carnage routinely. One morning between 3 and 4 a.m. I was alone in the bay. We have 4 trauma bays and 2 resus rooms, in a rectangle surrounding the nurses' station. Catching up on documentation, I became aware of a man walking up from behind me on the right, outside the nurses' station and into one of the trauma rooms. Except I didn't hear any doors open. Big, noisy, motion-activated doors. He looked at me over his shoulder, and as he walked through the room doors, but didn't answer when I called out hello. I walked around, losing sight of the bay door as I rounded a big column to make sure it wasn't a lost visitor, and there was no one there. There's no way out other than through that door, and it was out of my line of sight for maybe a second max. I later related this story in heebie-jeebies I felt while I was looking for the strange dude to another nurse. She said she had the exact same experience last week. People bring it up from time to time, same story, guy walks into the room and is then gone by the time you go look for him. We've decided to just leave him alone. I hope he finds what he's looking for though. In college I worked at an orderly and acute treatment psychiatric hospital. I was there for about a year and a half, during which time I worked the night shift on the stabilization unit. This was the unit for people who were too unstable to be grouped in with the regular men or women's units. Often they would become psychotic, and we'd find some meds that worked for them, and within a week they would be transferred to a unit with more freedom. My first night on the job, I walked in feeling nervous. At the desk, 2 other techs were chatting with a woman in a hospital gown. I came over and she introduced herself. She seemed completely normal. She told me not to worry about my first shift and that I would do just fine, and that she was sure all the other staff would help me out until I found my footing. I felt deeply reassured. This woman didn't seem like she belonged in the ward. She seemed completely normal. Then she said she had to go back to bed and turned around. The back of her head was gone. Where the back of her head was, all the hair had been shaved off, and there was a gory mass of scars and stitches and bruising. It looked like something out of a horror film. I seriously can't describe how messed up it was. It looked like she'd been shot and then someone had hastily tried to put it back together. I'm proud to say I didn't react, but immediately after she'd gone back to her room, I asked the other techs what the deal was. They said that she'd tried to take her own life by driving a car into a tree and had several brain surgeries and was still recovering. They said most of the time she was perfectly lucid, but had instances of sudden and extreme violence, which is why she was on that unit. She also had a habit of picking at the wound, which was still healing. She had a couple more reconstructions to go because of the extent to which her skull had been mangled. Honestly, after I read her file, I was surprised she was still alive. Anyway, it scared the ever-loving crap out of me. It was such a perfectly horror movie trope. That was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me on a night shift. I remember wondering if the other techs had set it up to freak me out on my first night. The lady became one of my favorite patients, and aside from the occasional outburst, was one of the most well-behaved and best-spoken. We had a lot of late-night conversations until she was transferred. The old children's ICU is currently under construction to be turned into medical labs, so we have to patrol the area. Once again to make sure the area is secure, or to report it to the contractor/foreman, stayed to plan the next day. When patrolling the area, several security officers have reported seeing a single white male child with short brown hair in a 90s bowl cut, about 5 to 7 years of age. I personally dismissed this, as this was before the psych ward incident, as a tall tale told with the intent to scare me because I was new at the time. I got that building's patrol one night, and a foreman who stayed late called security and asked for a security officer to come up because a kid locked himself in a room, and I don't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there, or something to that effect. I unlocked the door for him, looked in what could only be a 10 by 8 room for about 10 minutes. No kid, called it in as a false alarm, and finished my patrol. I work night shift on a trauma floor. I once had a patient that had been beaten with a baseball bat and required multiple surgeries. He was in his 30s and had visitors that kept lingering around, a 60-something-year-old lady with a glass eye. Something about this lady just creeped me out, but there was something off about her. Around 10 p.m. that night, the creepy lady said goodbye and left. Later on in the shift, around 2 a.m., I went into this man's room to clear his PCA, pain pump, and retime his vital sign machine. I didn't turn a light on, as I didn't want to wake him. I'm in his room working on the machines for a solid 5 minutes, when all of a sudden I feel a breath on the back of my neck. Then very quietly a voice whispers, "I'm right behind you." I immediately scream out, "Holy Jesus!" The patient jumped up and turned his light on, and there behind me was a creepy lady. She'd been in the room the whole time. She said that she was trying to make sure I knew she was in the room so I wouldn't be startled. She told us she couldn't sleep from worrying about him, So she came back to the hospital to stay the night. He didn't know she'd come back. None of the staff saw her return. There were no chairs or recliners in the room at the time. So she was just there in the dark, standing, watching him breathe. Over this summer, I was at Oregon County Fair getting ready to head out of camp with my boyfriend. We were packing up our car tent on top of his FJ Cruiser, and I went up to the tent to start throwing out our things to pack up. The metal ladder is very slippery and had no grip tape on it, and I was sadly wearing socks. While coming out of the tent, I slipped and fell 7 feet straight onto my head. My boyfriend dropped everything and rushed to me, asking if I was okay, and I replied that I was fine, but my head hurts. I have no recollection of any of this. He told me to sit down in the car, and I was getting upset that he wasn't letting me get up and help him pack things. I guess out of annoyance, I got out of the car, and my legs collapsed beneath me. He called the paramedics immediately, and I started to slip into complete blackness. I don't remember much else, which is where the real story begins. I'm in the ambulance, and I can hear the sirens. I feel the oxygen enter my nose. I hear the EMTs yelling my name, but I can't respond, open my eyes, or move. Every second, I keep slipping deeper and deeper into what I can only explain as the darkness. It sounds silly, but this feeling and sensation is honestly indescribable, and unlike anything I've felt in my life. The EMT, helping me, starts to push incredibly hard with his fingers into my sternum, which brings me back with each press because of the pain. I open my eyes slightly, and I hear the EMT say, "Only responds to painful stimuli," and then I was out. The next thing I remember is the feeling of my clothes being cut off me when I get to the hospital. I apparently then started to have seizures and convulsions due to the lack of oxygen that was coming to my brain. As I slipped deeper and deeper and got further and further away from this world, they had to insert a ventilator into me because I was beginning to cease breathing on my own. My boyfriend was obviously in shambles, and all the doctors could tell him was they were not sure if I would have permanent brain damage, be fine, or die. All the while, I'm slowly dying on the gurney entering the ICU. I remember being stranded in the blackness, floating, wandering, waiting. I was not sure what I was waiting for or what I was doing in this place. I had no idea what was happening. I saw nothing and felt nothing. I was nothing. I didn't know who I was, what had happened, or where the hell I was. I remember it felt like floating through endless space, but the thing is, there was an overwhelming sense of calmness through this, and I wasn't scared. After almost 24 hours, I started to slowly come back and break consciousness at certain moments of my coma. Then the most beautiful thing happened, and I won't forget it for the rest of my life. My boyfriend was finally let into the ICU to see me. After all this madness that was happening that I was completely gone for, he asked the nurse if he could hold my hand, and her response was, "Yes, but be careful. She will probably sense you. And we can't have her getting excited while she has a tube in her throat." He approached me, and at that moment, I slowly started to open my eyes. I remember while I was wandering in what felt like purgatory, all I could think about was Aaron. I didn't know who Aaron was, or what Aaron was, but all I knew was the idea of Aaron gave me a feeling of warmth, a reason to find my way out of the dark place. I felt that, as long as I had this thing, I would be okay. Aaron told me, before I had slightly opened my eyes, I started to reach out for him while my eyes were still closed. He grabbed my hand at the moment, and I came back into my body, opened my eyes ever so slightly, and started to try and mouth the words, "I love you," quickly realizing that the words couldn't come out, and that there was a tube in my mouth. Aaron was crying, and I fell back into the nothingness place. Well, obviously I'm fine now. I exited whatever place that was. I've always thought that when someone is dying or about to die, traces of DMT have been found firing off in the brain. Now, I've done DMT and have blasted off before, and I've even had telepathic contact with what I thought were interdimensional beings while on it. But there was no sign of that in this place. There were no vibrant or beautiful colors, no contact with these special and beautiful creatures. Some people call them machine elves, and no sense of completion into the next realm. It made me wonder if there really is life after death, and if there really is a place I'm going to after I leave my earthly body. Maybe I didn't see these things because I wasn't ready to make the cross or start that journey. Maybe the higher powers of the universe needed me to stay here in this world to complete what I was meant to do here. Maybe this was just the place to wait while the decision was being made. I don't know, but all I know is that I haven't given up hope. There is somewhere I go to when I'm no longer here. I hope that it will be beautiful. I'm a psychiatrist and 55 years old, who's now seeing patients for 6 hours a week only, almost retired. Back in 1985, as I began my residency, a mute adult male was admitted. He was in his early 20s and would never utter a word, and was almost robotic in movements. But he had his smile permanently on his face. For any sight of a smiling in a very odd way man, never uttering a sound, blinking sparsely, and walking in a mechanical fashion. It was hard to deal with as you attempted to communicate with him. His smile deepened as we attempted to speak, and his eyes shined very brightly. Too much lacriminal fluid? I don't know the reason. We did everything that was possible back then, at the very large hospital that it was. He did not respond to any treatment including shocks, ECT that is. One day his family came and requested his discharge. After legal and administrative formalities, they took him away. One of the psychiatrists was a married female with kids, who would refuse to see him and told the chief of the unit as well. The guy made her feel scared. She was way senior than me, and always friendly, and I could never ask her why. Many years later, I ran into her at a psychiatric conference. We were both working at different places, and she asked me, "Do you recall the mute guy who I refused to see and even told the chief of psychiatry unit about?" I said yes, the guy with a smile affixed like a stamp to his face. She had a very scary experience with him a few years after his discharge. One morning she was going out to work and a guy stopped her on her driveway. He hands her a small packet and said it was for her. Then she noticed that the package was oozing blood and the guy was dripping blood in torrents. She screamed and drove back. Fortunately, her husband was still in the house. They called the police and their friends. The packet had testicles of the guy who was bleeding like hell. He was in shock. The guy was the smiling man. I am a hospital day shift worker, and I have been in my field for 3 years up until recently, and I've never experienced anything paranormal. I work in a critical care unit where many people have passed. Last week, I walked up to a piece of equipment and I was the only person in the room, aside from my sedated patient, and one of the touchscreen buttons was physically tapped on. I heard the tap and watched it light up. I kind of stood there wondering what happened, and then watched it essentially get tapped again, and unselected what was selected before. Although I didn't actually hear a tap the second time, I got chills and had to leave the room. I brushed it off as a mechanical error, or something like that. But just now, a week later, I was walking down the main hallway alone and heard from behind me someone whisper, "Hey." I ignored it, thinking I was overhearing someone. Then I clearly heard someone whisper my name from behind me. So I turned around thinking it was a co-worker. I was alone. I've never had experiences before, and now all of a sudden, I am. I work in a hospital, and I've had some experiences. Let me explain a little first about the setup on my work area. The office is between two exam rooms, meaning that the only way into the office is through one of the exam rooms, which is entirely senseless. But alas, I didn't design the place. That being said, if you're in one of the exam rooms and both doors out of the office are open, you can hear things going on in the other exam room. Also, both exam rooms have bathrooms. This is all relevant. I don't typically work super late, but I am there in the evening sometimes, and most of what I've experienced has happened when I'm alone. It's almost always in what I will call Exam Room 1. I hear strange noises, constantly have the sensation of being watched or that I'm not alone in the room, and I see shadows with relative frequency, even when I have co-workers with me, but only if I'm in the office and the door is open. Weird things had happened too, like doors closing on their own, not just a gradual closing, all of a sudden. Once a roll of medical tape rolled across the floor, things like that. But one instance in particular sticks out to me. One night while I was alone, I was with a patient in exam room 2. When I'm alone, I usually leave the doors to the office open into both exam rooms because no one is going to use the other exam room, and I need to hear if my phone is ringing in the office. I tend to favor room 2, and not just because of the seemingly hauntedness of exam room 1. Weird stuff has happened in room 2 as well, just not nearly as much. Anyway, I was with a patient in room 2, and suddenly I heard these weird noises coming from room 1, and they weren't subtle. They were kind of loud. At first, I wasn't concerned because whoever was making them wasn't trying to conceal their presence, so I assumed it was one of my co-workers from the overall department. But then it began to get disruptive. I realized that it seemed to be coming from the bathroom in room 1, and it sounded like someone was in there banging around. I initially thought someone was, perhaps someone aggressively, using the bathroom, but there didn't appear to be any rhyme or reason to the noises. They sounded random, and it wasn't just like the sound of pipes, because A, we never heard that stuff, and B, it was so loud and constant. At first, I legitimately wondered if I were going crazy, but then my patient looked in that direction, clearly having heard it too. So I said, "I'll be right back," and then stood up to go investigate. I walked into my office towards exam room 1 and could clearly see that the door into the inside hallway was closed, meaning there was no way anyone could get out without me knowing, and I was still hearing the noises. I heard the noises until the moment I stepped over the threshold into room 1, like the second I crossed over into the room, and then suddenly they stopped completely. I looked into the bathroom and thought the light was on. It had been off last I checked. It should be noted that the light is a motion sensor. No one was in there, and I was seriously spooked. But I had to finish my exam. "I don't know what that was, but we're going to ignore it," I said to the patient, and then proceeded with the exam. I didn't tell my co-workers at first, but several months later, one of them told me of an experience they had, and I was shocked because it was nearly identical to my own. The only difference was that the noises stopped on their own without her having to investigate, and it wasn't what she'd call aggressive unlike mine. But it was coming from the bathroom in exam room 1. Her patient heard it as well, and it happened while she was working alone. We've had people pass in both rooms, so they could well be haunted, but who knows? Maybe there's a reasonable explanation for this, or perhaps I'm working with phantoms. My mother used to live in a country town between Melbourne and Bendigo here in Australia. The town was known for its hot rods and back in the day gold mining. As there wasn't much in the way of jobs, she used to work as a cleaning lady for a few places, but she mostly worked at the same clinic every night for 3 hours. Most nights, she'd call me to pass the time. Eventually, I found out that weird things would happen to her while she was there on her own. As a bit of background, things always used to happen to her when she was younger, as my grandmother used to work as a medium. I do recall seeing things, also as a child, but would block it out. I didn't want to believe I had seen anything, as I was always scared. My whole childhood scared. It didn't help that my very young parents would make me watch scary movies with them as entertainment, telling me, when the scary bits come, close your eyes. They never did, and then they'd lock me in a room with the lights off and tell me monsters were coming for me. So sometimes she'd ask me to come and visit her, and I'd make the 3-hour trip to her town, and I'd help her with cleaning duties. Instead of 3 hours of cleaning, it'd be 1.5 as we were 2 people, as I had finished vacuuming one room and moved on to the next. A big folder of documents fell off the shelf, and there was no way it could have fallen on its own. It was tightly squeezed in there with other folders. Closed doors would suddenly open or close, and I'm pretty damn scared at this point, but kept repeating in my head this one verse of the Bible. The Lord is my light and salvation. Whom should I fear? By now we're finishing up, and I'm out the front by the automatic doors sweeping, when out of the corner of my eye I see someone walk past me and just go inside. I turned to say the clinic was closed, but there was no one there. Just me and the open doors that closed, and I stood there, scared out of my mind. As you can imagine, that was the last time I helped her. I work at a small 48-bed hospital. These experiences happen in or near the decommissioned psych wing. IT, in which I work, was moved into this wing into old patient rooms. At first I'd hear my name called, often from down the hall or from empty rooms. Thinking someone needed tech support, I would try to locate the caller, but there was never anyone there. Many times I'd see people in empty rooms, patients on a bed, doctors in white lab coats next to them. As this was a decommissioned wing, it made me turn around and investigate, only to find the rooms empty. Frequently, there was a male and female walking together, apparently talking to each other, and they would turn into the room next to mine. I'd follow them, only to find they had entered a room through a closed door with no one inside. It was always the same room too. One afternoon on a Saturday, I got called in while my 4-year-old daughter and I were downstairs. I headed over but was unable to unlock the notoriously problematic back door to our wing. However, I saw a man coming down the hallway towards me, and I knocked on the door and motioned that I was locked out. He appeared to look right at me, but instead of coming to my aid, made a right-hand turn into the office next to mine. I quickly leaned forward to better see and hurriedly knocked on the door, thinking he hadn't seen or heard me, only to realize the door to the office was closed. Confused, I thought maybe I had seen a reflection in the window from behind me, and turned, asked my daughter if anyone had walked behind us, to which she denied. I was able to get the door open finally, and the office was empty. Another time, our wing was fully occupied due to a remodel which displaced some staff. I heard what I thought was a metal cart coming down the hall, and then a tremendous crash, like a dozen pots and pans hitting the tile floor. I jumped up and ran into the hallway, partly to assist and partly to make sure no one was hurt. No one on our floor had heard anything. There was no cart and no disaster. Next, I was called in on New Year's Eve before midnight. The issue took about 20 minutes to resolve, and since I was going to miss the festivities anyway, I thought I would document my time and head home. Upon entering my office, I noticed the bathroom door was open several inches, which I always keep closed. This wasn't a big deal. Housekeeping had probably left it open while cleaning. For some reason, I did not close it as I normally would have during the day. As I typed up the incident, a man exited my bathroom. At first I thought perhaps my boss had come in to investigate as well, but then why would he be in my office? As I looked up at the man, just over 6 feet tall and thin, he looked over at me in shock, as I must have been doing to him, and then he disappeared. Considering the hour, I noped out of there without finishing my report. The old TVs in this room of the wing would sometimes turn on by themselves, just static as they had no feeds, but I had to unlock empty patient rooms and turn TVs off occasionally, with always the volume turned up to the max. One other co-worker has told me he has heard his name called when no one is there, and seen a woman walking down the hall without the man, and the doctor by the bedside. Many people report hearing things they can't explain, but no one else has told me that they can see anything. The rest of the hospital has no abnormal activity that we know of. I work night shift at a mental hospital. Obviously, countless people have passed here for various reasons. There are 4 floors, with the 4th floor being well known as a hotspot for paranormal activity. Me being security, I have to check in every once in a while. The 4th floor is essentially an extremely long hallway, approximately 1,800 steps, with housing units on both sides throughout. Each unit has a 5-inch thick steel door, and there's a window at the very end of the hall. They don't house patients due to the fact that the county took over a while before I started, and it's completely empty by the time 3rd shift rolls around. The 4th floor is also the only floor in the entire complex that is completely off the ground due to the complex being built into a hill, where the electroshock therapy took place a long time ago. This occurrence happened last week, Wednesday, on 3rd shift. I wanted to do a walk through the 4th floor that night around 3 AM for no other reason than feeling brave. I walk all the way down to the 4th floor to the window. Eventually, as I get closer, I started seeing that the window obviously needs cleaning. When I get about 5 feet away, all of a sudden, there was a handprint that would have been extremely noticeable even 15 feet away. I looked at the handprint, turned around, said nope, and walked back down the hall. On my way back from the window, I peek into a side office area with my flashlight to just look. Nothing. I kept going. After a few seconds, it sounded like someone was running up behind me, so I walked even faster because everything in my body said not to turn around. As I kept walking, I passed by a unit. As I passed, I heard what sounded like someone punching the door. I put it up as paranoia due to the running I heard prior. That is until I passed another unit. Another loud thud as if someone punched the door. So at this point I start speed walking down the hall, and while I hear footsteps following mine. Mind you, these units are not connected at all and the entire floor is empty. That's just one of my experiences. I've also been having dreams of a white skinny woman in a hospital gown that has black hair with bangs in her face. I always thought she was just a reoccurring person in my dreams, until I talked with one of the CNAs that worked tonight in the kids unit. I never brought her up to the CNA. We were just talking about ghosts and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman. I just explained. I explained to the CNA in detail about how she looks in my dreams, and she just went pale with her mouth hung open. Supposedly the ghost is extremely well known throughout the hospital by various people. They've seen her in mirrors, have been locked in bathrooms, and have seen her just walking around. But in my dreams, she always just appears or runs up to me, grabs me, and screams in my face. There was this one dream in particular where I woke up from a dream to wake up in my duplex stairway. I walk down the stairs because that's where my bedroom is, and walk into my bedroom. Once I'm in my bedroom, I see my fiancée sleeping on her side of the bed, and myself sleeping in front of my closet, which is on my side of the bed. I see the same woman standing next to my body, just staring at me. I walk up to her, and I get the courage to ask her who the hell she is, and she looks at me, grabs me, and screams in my face, then shoves me onto my bed. which is when I officially wake up at 3:15. I have no clue who this woman is at all, but I still dream about her every now and then. Every single dream is in a different place, but she's just there, and this has been going on since I started working at my job. Long ago, I lived with my family in a government quarter behind the hospital in a town just south of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Being the restless teenager, I cycled everywhere every time I could leave the house. Sometimes I would go to the hospital compound to visit a small coffee shop which sold my favorite sweets. I would also grab a drink and enjoy it there to replenish my energy before more cycling. Beside the shop stood a small shrine dedicated to one of the Hindu deities, Ganesh with the elephant head. At the time, the shrine looked new. I was there buying some sweets when they had a puja, a consecration ceremony, for the newly installed statue of the deity. That was when I learned that the shop owner's son was the one who built the shrine. He was an orderly at the hospital, a pleasant-looking man who I'd sometimes see helping out at the shop. One day I heard a man ask the son why he built the shrine, since it's the son's story, which I will tell from his perspective. I'm going to try and make this as accurate as possible. From the son's perspective, a year ago I was working late, so I came to help my father close up for the night. After my father left for home, I stayed behind to finish up some paperwork. It was almost midnight when I locked up and started to walk down the walkway past the morgue to the exit. In front of the morgue, I came across a young man who was crying unconsolably. This was not unusual at the hospital. I asked the man if he was okay and if he needed some help. The man turned to me and said, "They must hate me, Ane." Ane is Tamil for big brother, and also a term of respect that we, regardless of race, use to address an older Indian man. "Why do you say that?" "I've been here since last night and no one has come for me," said the young man, who I think must have been Malay or Chinese. "Don't be like that. Maybe they're on their way. I'm sure they'll be here tomorrow. Trust me," I said. And the man calmed down a little. "Thank you," he said, as he lifted his head and smiled. I'll never forget that face and smile. So I left him and went back. He waved and I waved back. The next day, a family came to claim their son's remains. They came from clear across the country, and back then the roads were not as good as they are today, so it took them a while to arrive. They told us that their son, who was studying at a university nearby, had been involved in a railroad collision and had died. When they received the news, they were at their farm, which was far in the interior that made the journey take very long. The medical officer instructed me to check the identity of the remains in the morgue. I took a member of the family with me, and we headed to the morgue. When I pulled away the shroud to reveal the face of the body, it struck me that this was the young man who I had spoken to the night before. Half his face was gone, but I knew it was him. I could still recognize him. His father verified that this was indeed his son, and then cried. I led him out to where his family was waiting. Then I left them and came back to the morgue to finish up my job. "You don't need to be sad. Your family's here. They love you very much. I'll get you ready, then you can go home," I said to the body. I looked away from the face to check the tag against the paperwork on my clipboard when I saw the face again. I was about to cover it with a shroud, and I could have sworn that it smiled a little. The next day I asked for permission to build this shrine so that perhaps the spirits from the morgue will not wander around this place at night. This was many years ago. The shop, the shrine, the morgue, and a couple of the buildings nearby are now gone. In their place now stand multi-story buildings. In one of the buildings, not far from where the old morgue was, you'll find the new morgue. Something weird happened to me while I was in a mental hospital in Amityville, New York, the same town of the Defoe murders of the 70s. Anyway, I was in this hospital called Brunswick Hospital for 2 weeks, and in those 2 weeks I experienced scary stuff, besides the fact that there were patients screaming and saying how much they want to end everyone in the unit. The first night there I slept the whole day and night. Then in the day I heard patients speaking about noises in the bathroom and stuff. I didn't believe at first, since the unit was for kids. I was the oldest of the unit at 17. The second night I started hearing stuff in the bathroom, like someone in there walking for 30 to 40 minutes straight. And it was weird because if you took more than 10 minutes, the staff would check on you. And I never heard the staff knocking the door or opening the door. I didn't pay mind to it, and I kept on sleeping. The 3 nights I went to the bathroom at 3 in the morning, I was having problem with my meds and I couldn't sleep. After I left the bathroom, I went to my room, and I swear to God 2 minutes after I was out, I heard the sink going off and all the toilets going off at the same time. You best believe I didn't sleep that night. In the morning I tried to speak to the staff about it, but they decided to ignore my questions. I didn't pay it any mind. I mean, it's a mental hospital. What else should I expect? 2 days before I leave, I felt someone taking off my blankets, and as soon as I wake up, there was nobody there. My roommate was sleeping, and I knew it wasn't him. I woke him up and asked him if it were him, or if something like that had ever happened to him, and he later told me he heard stuff too. Thankfully, I got to leave that place and never went back. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. As I've mentioned before, I would really appreciate it if you could check out my Twitter and Instagram. Follow me over there because I have some cool stuff coming really soon, and it would mean a lot if you followed me so that you could be the first to know. Thanks guys. Link at the top of the description. So, I hope you enjoyed hospital stories. To all of those of you in fear of the coronavirus, I know it sucks to get ill, but I've checked out the stats of the virus itself, and it seems to have like a crazy high survival rate. Like only if you're really old do you have like a 10% or even 15% chance of going from it. And by the looks of it, it only really affects people that already have pre-existing conditions. So stay strong guys, and I'm pretty sure you'll be fine. Loads of people are also buying out all the toilet paper and antiseptic gel, which is a bit of an inconvenience to everyone else, but I think they're all scared. In any case, don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for listening. And I'll see you all in the next one.